In fact, our earliest reference to a palace in Eastry comes from the 670s, from a story of royal betrayal and bloodshed. David, as soon as Sam knew that we were coming here, he went, "Oh, great, there was a murder here, a murder." What was it?
A royal murder of two princes, Athelbert and Athelrad, two princes of Kent, murdered by their cousin. Undoubtedly, the background story is dynastic feuding. And he murders them secretly at night and thinks he's got away with it by burying them in the King's Hall. But because of shafts of light that radiate out, the murder is revealed.
So what's this white light all about?
It's an indication of a miracle. It's a miracle light, God's light, and it means that we've got saints.
So it's like a Hammer horror, that the light comes on and suddenly,
yes.
Oh, it wasn't me, Chief.
Exactly.
Interestingly, the bodies were moved to the chapel. And if the medieval chapel is on the remains of an earlier chapel, we're now sitting bang on where the two princes were buried.
So there could be a pair of little, innocent, sweet, darling princes buried somewhere under these flagstones.
Unfortunately, you won't find the murder victims because we know from the saint-like tradition that they were translated to Ramsey in Huntingdonshire.
So no bodies?
Almost certainly not, but you might find the murder weapon, perhaps.
Oh, I like that idea. On day one, we found a spectacular brooch on Highborough Hill that seemed to be Anglo-Saxon. Not only that, but the brooch appeared to be high status. Now, after a little cleaning, it's time to hear the verdict. All morning, the diggers up on the site have been saying, is it Saxon, is it Victorian? Helen, you're the specialist. What is it?
Well, it is actually Victorian. Oh. There's a few things that give it away. The really big giveaway is a soldier on the back. The Victorians added separate fixings to their brooches, and the Anglo-Saxons didn't, especially not on a gold piece. Secondly, ovals in plain wire, wrong. Should be twisted beaded wire on something Anglo-Saxon. But the real clincher, the most obvious thing is, on these balls around here, they're dented, so they're hollow. Anglo-Saxons did not make things with hollow gold balls on them. Everything was solid. So I'm afraid it is Victorian.
What I don't understand is there must have been 20 trained archaeologists out there, thousands of pounds of taxpayers' money invested in their education, and yet everyone was really tentative about whether or not it was modern or Anglo-Saxon. Why?
Well, I did my PhD on this kind of thing, and I still was a bit nervous about it. It's because until it's cleaned up, you can't see the details, and both the Victorians and the 7th century Anglo-Saxons are both copying Roman designs of jewellery. They were both trying to look as classical as they could, and both doing pretty well, actually. So ultimately, they are going to look very similar.
Back at Highborough Hill, there's still no sign of Anglo-Saxon graves or buildings. It clearly isn't a barrow or burial ground. Mick's idea of a meeting point is the only theory still standing. But at least Matt has found some evidence of a structure at the bottom of Trench 1.
Matt, what do you think this is now?
Well, we've got down to the top of this chalk, and it looks, basically, it's a road of some sort. A huge flint nodules have been packed in at the bottom, and then chalk has been tamped down all the way across it. But the strangest thing about it, it's like that deep so far.
Half a metre.
A really solid road, yeah.
So what kind of road might that be?
Well, let me show you one that was dug up in Yorkshire that I think really sort of explains what we've got. And there they had a hollow way that had worn out over the years with cattle and people walking along its side. It got so deep and presumably so boggy that in the end they decided to put a properly built road of boulders and stones in the bottom of it. And I think that's probably what we've got here. We've got a hollow way which has then been reinforced with a new road built up. And I think they're probably doing it because this is probably going up to the mill on the top of the hill, and it's going to get a lot of use.
It couldn't be Saxon.
I don't think so. I mean, mills like that don't come into the 12th century anyway. So if it's going up there, it would be later. I mean, at the moment, my guess is that this hollow way might be a bit earlier. It could be, you know, might even be Roman or something like that, but the filling and everything's probably late medieval.
So where's the Anglo-Saxon?
Well, we've got various finds from across the site, but what we haven't got is any structures at all to go with them.
By the middle of day 2, Highborough Hill hasn't revealed any more of its Saxon past. In fact, apart from a high-status brooch, the finds on the hill have been almost entirely prehistoric and medieval. Even the iron pot, which we'd hoped was a Saxon cemetery vessel, turns out under X-rays to be nothing but a modern paint pot. Perhaps it was magnolia. With no burials or structures other than a bit of road, Mick's left with only one course of action. Mick, why are we closing down the hill?
Because I think we've done all we need to do, and we can do up here, and we need to work elsewhere. You know, our ideas that we've got about it won't be helped by more holes.
What ideas?
Well, you know, we had this idea that it might be a meeting point, a moot hill where assemblies were held. Another possibility which has come up is that it might actually have some sort of, well, we don't have a term for it, a sort of symbolic centre, I suppose. Because if you go along the Roman road along there and you look back across to this, it looks like a great barrow. And I'm just wondering whether the name that we've got now of Wodensborough, which is a village over there, didn't actually apply to this, and it wasn't thought that it was where, I don't know, Woden was buried or worshipped or something like that. And that's why the finds are here.
Would the name really have shifted from one place to another?
Well, I think it could. It could have happened in the 18th century when there was this amazing find, apparently consisting of 30 glass vessels at Wodensborough, and people might have said, what could have caused this? Oh, maybe the place name's in the wrong place. This must be the Woden cult centre, and just moved it. Because if this is a cult centre, then it's even more likely to have been a meeting point as well. That's documented in lots of them.
This is typical time team, isn't it? None of us are going to be able to prove this, but we all think it's a really plausible theory. At least in Eastry village, Stuart's found some solid evidence of a Saxon enclosure.
And this fairly ordinary looking pathway, I think, is a remnant of the boundary of this Saxon estate centre we've been looking for, because just when you get to here, you see how it drops off on that side.
It must be a couple of metres high here,
yeah,
isn't
I think this that we're on top of is a remnant of the bank that defines the western side of this enclosure. That side's the village, that's outside the enclosure, that side's inside. And we're on top, actually, we've walked along a big, broad bank. And it's this that's been preserving this boundary for God knows how long, in fact.
That's good, that is.
But not far away, the first trench at Eastry Court hasn't shown up any sign of a palace or any Anglo-Saxon finds. Promising geophys results persuade Mick to open a second trench at the bottom of the garden and a third trench near the church, ripping up even more of David's lawn.
If that looks all right, when he replaces it, I'm a Dutchman.
So the gardener going to be very happy.
Yeah, Dennis is going to be deeply miserable at that.
Oh dear.
Despite the lack of evidence from the trenches, Stuart's still banging on that the garden is in a royal enclosure. Stuart, all day you've been saying, we're in the right place, we're in the right place. We've dug loads of trenches now, and we haven't found the palace.
And I'm going to carry on saying we're in the right place. Now, if you look at this photograph we took from the helicopter, this is the area of the enclosure. There's the church there. This bit I've highlighted in white, that actually survives on the ground. It's a footpath now.
But what makes you think that just because we've got a bit that's extant there, that there were all those other bits there?
Because they're continued in the mapping. You can see their boundaries are continued through the different generations of maps, and they still exist to this day.
Why so much space? It's a very big enclosure for a relatively small palace.
Yeah. I think that's, again, designed for status reasons. You know, you want your buildings to look impressive with lots of open space around them. Rather like, you know, Buckingham Palace isn't hemmed in with lots of other buildings. It's got nice spaces around. It emphasises the dramatic size of the buildings in the middle.
Fuelled by his conviction, Stuart tries to persuade Mick that opening trenches in the recreation ground is a priority. But Mick's not having any of it.
It's all very busy here, Mick, but we haven't forgotten about the recreation ground, have we?
No, but when I had a look at it, I was very worried about all those earthworks over the top of it, whether they were later cottages or whatever. Whereas this had rather nice geophysics on, so I thought we'd start here.
Right. But I'm very keen to look at that area because there's been finds up from that area. It's within this enclosure. I'm a bit worried we sort of forget about that side. We need to sample over a big area.
Well, we've got 3 things going on in here anyway.
It's all a bit lopsided. It's on this side of the church.
You know, we've got enough on our hands for the moment.
Right. But we will go over there, won't we?
I mean, I'm sure we'll get to that eventually.
Is that a promise, then?
No. No, it's not. No.
By the end of the day, we've moved all our resources to Eastry Court in our search for the palace. But having not yet found anything, how far has that got us? In a way, I don't feel that we've advanced at all from where we were at the beginning of day 1. We knew that that hill had got some amazing finds, and sure enough, it's got more amazing finds.
Oh, we have moved on, though, because we've now got a lot of holes open in the village. You know, so we're well on the way to sorting out what's going on under Eastry.
But the hill itself has been pretty intractable, isn't it?
Yeah, it's been terrible. I feel really inadequate because, as you say, I don't think we are any further on with it. And I thought it was going to be so easy.
No, but we are, because the local archaeologists have been saying to me this evening that they now know more about that hill than they did and what the context of those finds are. So they don't feel it's, you know, we haven't moved on. They now know a lot more about the hill.
That's good.
Yeah, but we haven't got the link between the hill and the village.
Well, I think we have. I think looking at the pattern of roadways, it fits into a pattern which link it with Eastry, which is where the core of the activity is.
Yeah.
Yes, but links the hill to what?
Well, the centre of activities in Eastry, which we shall get, hopefully, when we've finished digging all those holes in the middle. We haven't finished them yet.
We've got a large enclosure there. I think we're confident we're digging in the right place for the right reasons. So we've dug in one bit, and we've got a great opportunity to dig in another bit, and that's the recreation ground.
And we shall start that tomorrow.
You've been putting it off, haven't you?
Yes, I have today, but we shall start it tomorrow.
Yeah?
Yeah.
So can we find the heart of Anglo-Saxon Eastry? Will we find it underneath the recreation ground? We'll know tomorrow.
Yeah. Cheers, mate.
Beginning of day 3 here in Kent, and we've had some fantastic finds up at Highborough Hill. We're still putting in trenches down here at Eastry Court, but could the centre of our Anglo-Saxon royal estate be here in this little recreation ground? Phil, I see they've got you working here at last.
Well, somebody got to, otherwise we'll never find out.
At Eastry Court, digging continues in our search for the palace, with a new trench opened next to the house. Just when we thought the Highborough Hill story had ended, Mick's now having his ear bent by John Gator, who's determined to excavate some unexplored geophys anomalies.
The thing is, Mick, on day 1, I'd got this very distinctive area of noise.
Yeah.
We've got anomalies that extend for 25 metres across the hillside here.
Yeah.
At the start, I didn't know whether it was cemetery or whether it was occupation.
But we're not quite sure what the occupation is, because it's very odd.
It is.
Well, I think, therefore, to, you know, abandon it, not knowing whether we've got Saxon here, because we haven't dug some of the features.
Yeah.
It seems we haven't answered the question. I think we need to get dating material out, because at the moment, all we've got is a couple of sherds of medieval.
Yeah, but we haven't just got 2 bits of medieval pot. We have got medieval pot out of this ditch here. We've got a medieval pot out of the pit down there as well. This is one load of medieval stuff that's come out of all the features up here, except for 2 bits of Saxon pot that were actually stratigraphically above the medieval in one of those pits.
So they're derived from something on the top.
I mean, if you're happy to ignore this then and dismiss that as possibly being Anglo-Saxon, if you're saying it's all medieval.
I mean, you know, why, in the time we've got, why don't we just strip another area and, given you're worried about dating evidence, dig whatever feature we're on top of in there so that we get some more dating evidence of one sort or another, but we don't strip that big an area that we can't handle it in the remaining time that we've got.
Mick reluctantly agrees to go along with John's idea and extends the top of Trench 2. While in the recreation ground, Phil's pulling out all the stops in the hunt for the palace. But with the lack of any hard evidence, our palace remains a virtual one. With help from our historians, Ray Sand finally reveals what such a palace may look like. When people looked at it in the surrounding countryside, how do you think they would have felt about it?
Well, it's the great ideal that it's the equivalent of Camelot in 7th century Kent. as a great building that is the focus for all that is good and noble. It's a place of identity and solidarity. If you were a football supporter, it would be your great stadium where the great action, the great dramas took place.
I can see that its dimensions are really grand, but would it have been the colour of a garden fence?
Very interesting possibility is that they would have had some gilt paint. It parallels a description we have of the Temple of Old Uppsala, which could be seen shining, and there was something described as a golden chain around its roof that shone from miles around.
So there could be some kind of decorative frieze all the way.
Exactly.
I think that's what I'd do if I had one of those. Would you put money on there being one of these in Eastry?
From the documentary sources, which, as far as the 7th century go, are very, very good, emphatically yes, Tony. I'm absolutely convinced that it was here and looked like this.
The search for such a building continues at the recreation ground. Phil?
Yo.
You got a palace in your trench?
No, not at all. I mean, we got two scruffy-ish looking features. There's one in there and there's one in there. They might turn out to be something, but apart from that, absolutely nothing.
Stuart, you promised me a royal palace. I could almost smell the mead and the roast boar.
Well, I still think we're in the right place for the right reasons. I mean, that's the critical point here. There doesn't seem to be any debris, modern or post-medieval debris. To me, that implies that the village hasn't been allowed to spread into this enclosure that we've identified, which implies that somewhere around this space is something very special.
Mick, why are these palaces so difficult to find?
Because they're built of timber, post holes and stuff like that. And really you need a large area to see whether the plan of post holes and slots makes any sense. And so where they've been found, it's been in gravel pits where you can strip a large area and see what the plan of everything is. It's, you know, it's difficult with little holes in an occupied area to piece anything together. But this is incredibly clean, isn't it?
That is the most amazing thing. To be in the middle of a village, and find nothing.
Yeah.
It's always great on Time Team when they get really enthused about finding Sweet Fanny Adams, isn't it? What are we supposed to do?
I think we dig more holes.
Much to Stuart's relief, Mick opens a second trench in the recreation ground. Over at Highborough Hill, John's fight to reopen the dig has paid off. Well, sort of. Was it worth it?
Well, I think so. Look, we've got more features that we didn't know about, and we've got Saxon pottery.
What's that feature?
Well, we've got a ditch, Tony, that's running up this brown material up towards a hill and round in that direction.
What about the pottery, John? Where did you find that?
Well, it came from the ditch.
It did.
So can we now say we've got an Anglo-Saxon ditch?
Well, if you want to see the pottery,
yeah.
Tell me if this is evidence of a Saxon community.
Is this it?
It's Saxon, 850 AD.
This is the sum total of our finds in your trench, John. Another triumph for Geophys. At least this is better than what's been found in the trenches at Eastry Court Gardens. Absolutely nothing.
Hello, Paul.
Oh, hi, Alan.
In a newly opened trench at the recreation ground, at least there's a glimmer of hope.
Now, don't get too excited. It's probably not the biggest piece of pottery you've ever seen, but it's a piece of decorated early Saxon pottery.
That's amazing. It is minute.
It is.
But you can just see those kind of grooves. What are they made
It's
with?
combing. It's the sort of thing you get the classic Anglo-Saxon urn with the combed panels with the stamps in and that sort of thing. It's something along those lines, I think.
So does this mean accessory vessel in a grave or a cremation, or could this be the kind of thing that's used on a settlement site?
Hard to say. I mean, decorated pottery tended to get mainly used in graves, but you do get it on settlement sites as well. It's not very common on settlement sites, but you do find it.
Might it indicate a particularly high status site?
You can't really say that from that. No, it turns up on sites of all sort of different sorts of status. You know?
Well, either is pretty exciting. That's a
start, certainly, isn't it?
Yeah, that's absolutely brilliant.
But another minute piece of pottery seems little consolation for having found no evidence of an Anglo-Saxon palace in any of the trenches. So why haven't we found it?
That's a good question. If you look at this photograph that took from the helicopter, I've put these yellow dots, you can see them. These are the trenches that we've dug in this area. I've done something similar over the top of... This is a Royal Anglo-Saxon palace in Northumberland. Yeah. And at the same scale, I've drawn on dots which match the spacing of our trenches. And look, we could have dug like
missed
that,
the palace
missed
here.
it, we could have dug that, missed the palace, we could have gone on missing it. We could have dug 50 trenches and carried on missing it.
Yeah.
But we've only dug in one section of the enclosure. Why didn't we excavate there and there and there and there and there and there?
Well, that was a bit frustrating, that, because all this area in here, we just couldn't get access into it.
Farmer wouldn't let us get in, you see.
Yeah.
So we've missed it by bad luck.
Well, that and the fact that we really needed to strip large areas, as they've done when they found palaces and other sites, to see the patterns of post holes and timber slots and all the rest of it. It's difficult to do in a village that's still lived in and still occupied. You can't bulldoze it all out of the way.
By the end of the day, no more finds or structures have been found in the enclosure. So yet again, Time Team has failed to find an Anglo-Saxon palace. But we have found out something about Anglo-Saxon Eastry. In the 7th century, a community would have thrived here in Eastry. Near a Roman road and the coast, it would have been an important and powerful centre for East Kent. High-status finds on Highborough Hill led us to think the palace was there. We now think it was an Anglo-Saxon ritual centre, where valuable offerings were made. Through Stuart's investigations, we've revealed that the hill was on a network of ancient roads, linking it with an Anglo-Saxon centre at Eastry village. We now believe that it was somewhere in the village that the palace was once built, inside a royal enclosure with Eastry Court, the church and recreation ground at its heart.
If you'd like to see more episodes like this, you can make it happen.
Our new target is to reach 15,000 worldwide supporters on Patreon by the end of 2025. This will enable us to continue expanding the Time Team world. Enjoy front row seats for the greatest show on Earth and under it.
Deep in the gloom of these Scottish caves are messages from one of the most enigmatic peoples ever to live in Britain. This is just one of many symbols carved by the Picts, a people who so worried the Romans that they built Hadrian's Wall just to keep them out. But that's just part of these caves' colourful history. Over the centuries, Jacobite aristocracy, World War II refugees, even hermits have all sought shelter here. But now they're under threat. Rising sea levels mean it's only a matter of time before they succumb to the dark, cold Firth of Forth. And that's why we're here, to glean as much evidence as we can from these caves' rich past before it's too late. The term Picts describes the people who lived in northern Scotland from the 4th to 9th century AD. Their name comes from the Latin picti, meaning painted people, and they've fascinated historians and artists for centuries, despite leaving virtually no written history. The Picts' real legacy is their art, intriguing designs that have never been deciphered. And there's an unusually high number of them here in the Weems Caves, on the very edge of the Pictish nation. We've got a stand here. Is that a Pictish name?
Not as far as I know, no.
No, that's not a Pictish name, but we do have some classic Pictish symbols here. This double disc symbol here is a classic one.
What's this one here?
Well, that's a salmon. Again, that's probably original, it's probably Pictish, and it's probably dates from perhaps about the 7th or 8th century AD. But this fish over here...
What, this one down here?
That one there, it's quite different nature and character, and that's probably 19th century in date. We've got 1,500 years or more of carving straight in front of us here.
But we're going to have our work cut out. The 1,500 years of human activity here have featured periods of later occupation, industry, and unfortunately vandalism, including one case when a car was driven into this cave and set alight. Our next target is the Well Cave, which lies underneath the remains of the medieval Macduff's Castle. As well as a rumour of a secret tunnel connecting the cave to the castle, it's also believed that from the 10th to the 15th century, this was home to Christian hermits.
This is a big open area.
Yeah, it's about 12 metres in diameter.
It's high too.
Yeah.
Look, you've got the inscriptions on that side.
Well, they date from about 1860, 1861.
These carvings may be more recent, but they do have a special significance for the archaeologists on the dig. They're from the mid-19th century, when Wemyss became a popular Victorian attraction, as antiquarians, the forerunners of today's archaeologists, began to uncover the cave's rich history. Unfortunately, some of the methods used in the investigations were far from ideal.
Archaeology at this period wasn't really a science, it wasn't a subject that really come into existence. These were learned gentlemen who were inquiring about Scotland's past, and their qualifications was essentially to be a gentleman and to have the money to indulge their passion and interest.
Do we have any idea if they found any finds in those digs?
Well, yes and no. The records from those early explorations show that a number of finds were made, ceramics and a few other iron objects, but the descriptions and so on they gave them were relatively poor, and these artefacts weren't actually collected.
The technology and methods being used today are a bit more sophisticated. As part of an ongoing project implemented by Fife Council, the caves are now being digitally mapped.
We're getting a scan of about 5mm resolution here.
That's a point every 5mm?
Yeah.
The laser scanning will create a high-definition 3D model of the caves, recording them for posterity. And once the well cave has been scanned, we're going to put in a couple of trenches for our own investigation.
Oh, what's that?
Over in Jonathan's cave, Phil and Raksha are finally through the layer of 20th century rubbish and appear to have found, well, some earlier rubbish. It looks like Phil has hit an occupation layer, but unfortunately these finds are much too late to be Pictish. So far, the only evidence we have of these elusive people are the carvings. Our first trench in here will investigate the well that gave the cave its name, and in particular, Bridge will be looking for any evidence of medieval occupation, the period when hermits are believed to have lived here.
This is the well then over here?
Yeah, this is the well over here.
So the first trench is going to be around this?
It's going to come straight out here, I guess about a metre extending from, see the set stones here?
Yep.
All the way around.
Let's set around the edge.
The other intriguing aspect of the well cave is this tunnel, which according to folklore leads to the 15th century Macduff's castle over 20 metres above our diggers. But in its current state, it doesn't look a particularly welcoming proposition. It's now down to Matt to try and find archaeological evidence of a medieval man-made passageway.
We're going to put a trench sort of against that wall there, halfway into it, and let's see if we get some evidence that people made that hole.
The historical period we're investigating may be vast, some 1,500 years or more. But in geological terms, the Wemyss caves are young whippersnappers, cut from sandstone in the last 10,000 years.
I always think of caves as being almost as old as the Earth itself. The idea that people were around when they were being created and moved in practically straight away is quite bizarre.
It is, isn't it? I mean, 10,000 years ago, this was at the water's edge. The sea was bashing against this. It was totally inhospitable, as it were. But about 6,500 years ago, there was a change. The ice sheets started to melt. And as they melted, the weight was reduced and the land started to rise out of the water, lifting these up onto dry land. You can see here the layers of rock, these sandstone layers, they're very soft. And as the sea pounds against it, it breaks little bits off along these joints here. And every bit it breaks off, it then bashes further against the rock and knocks another bit off. So you get this it's like a huge tumble dryer of pebbles and rocks going round and round and round and scouring into the rock. And if you look, you see just up there on that shelf, can you see there's a whole load of pebbles just there?
Yeah, yeah.
That's almost just a remnant of that last process of the sea coming in here. Those pebbles are jammed into that rock. Given them a few more years, those pebbles would have brought down that ledge as they were swirled around. The cave would have got bigger.
In Jonathan's cave, Mick has decided to open up another trench in the search for Pictish evidence. It would be nice if one of them gave us a result, if only.
Now, we've actually got a piece of pot from around there which we think might actually be 17th century.
Right.
So in other words, that could be part of our Jacobite aristocracy that we know lived in here. But above it, we've got...
So what's happening here then?
Well, actually, this cave was once used as a nail-making workshop. Right. I mean, there is very, very little stratigraphy here.
So does that mean the Picts who carved these things were extremely small?
Or lying down?
I mean, the only way in which you could actually carve that is either to be extremely small or simply to get down here and work like that.
Yeah.
We think it's a serpent. You can see kind of this head hole here, and then the body curving round like this. And we thought, you know, it's probably a Pictish carving.
How do we know it's Pictish?
Well, we've had an expert looking at it. Anna Ritchie herself has actually seen it and said, yeah, there's no doubt about it. It is Pictish. The beauty of it is, look how low down in the cave it is. So, in fact, there's no way that you could actually make that carving with a ground level at this point.
There was a remarkable find in Fife, about 12 kilometres away from the Weems Caves, at a place called Norrie's Law.
So what happened to it?
Oh, it's a tragic tale because about 400 ounces of silver were found. Unfortunately, the people didn't want them to fall into the hands of the Crown treasure trove. And they actually sold them to a peddler who then sold them to a jeweller in Cooper. And he melted them down and made them into spoons. The objects themselves have left some clues. So what they must have done is to start off by making an ingot of silver. And then they would hammer that ingot flat and they would shape it into the leaf shape. And you can tell that because these are hammer marks on the back. They would have flipped it over, given it a light polish, and then engraved the decoration. Then they would have enamelled it and then give it a final polish.
So there's actually quite a complicated number of stages in it.
Absolutely, requiring a great deal of skill as well.
In the sloping cave, Phil's search for Pictish occupation is starting to uncover a lot of bone, although it's too early to say what period it belongs to. And something else has been discovered in this cave, but this time it's not Pictish, and for once we can translate it.
So what is that sort of Y-shaped, fork-shaped thing that we're looking at?
It's a very distinctive Norse or Viking rune.
Oh, crikey. But, I mean, is it what you'd expect to find in a cave like this?
You expect to find anything. And we know that there was Norse activity in this area.
Which letter is it?
It's the letter K. It's the 6th letter in the alphabet. And what's interesting is that the first 6 letters spell Futhok, a sort of magical formula. It's almost as if I were to say, God bless you, or praise be to Allah, or something like that.
This is a timely reminder that these caves contain centuries of history.
One of the most frustrating things about this site is how much of the archaeology has been interfered with by the sea, by rusty old nails, by barbecue fires, by graffiti, by a blazing car in a cave. But at last, we're beginning to get down onto untouched early archaeology, like this piece of butchered bone, both here and in Phil's cave. Are we beginning to get to the levels where some of the earliest inhabitants of these caves actually stood? And if so, what else might we find?
It's a cold, steely start to day 3 in Fife, and the trenches across this coastline are now producing evidence of centuries of human activity.
I've got a bit of bone in here. It looks burnt. Excellent.
But it's the sloping cave where we discovered unrecorded Pictish carvings that's attracting the most attention.
Look at the quantity of bone, and we're getting it from right down here, right on the base of the trench. And that bone is not the evidence of somebody having a party here. That is somebody living here. There's just too much bone. And at the moment, the only people that we can know use these caves are the Picts.
Down on the eroded beach, Douglas believes he's uncovered a relic from a different era of Weems history.
this is a stone. It's standing upright, a very unnatural position for it to be in, and it's actually contained within a large cut. Now, the obvious question is, who did it and why did they do it? Well, we don't have the exact answers to that now, but one thing we do know, that within the last few years we've had 2 skeletons come out from this area behind us.
Right.
There's no soil there now because the seas eroded it all away, and we've had carbon dates for these, so we know they're about 10th, 11th century AD and date. So it's possible that this is a stone which marks a Christian cemetery, and there may very well be further Christian burials behind this stone. This material here is 15th century, and so everything below this red layer has got to be pre-15th century.
Right.
So this is probably medieval. It probably relates to the occupation of the caves, and perhaps anywhere before the 10th to 15th centuries.
Right. And it looks like the sort of level it might be in the cave, so that it's sort of related perhaps to that strata coming out.
Very much so. That's another really helpful thing about this layer. Because it's been ploughed, we can tell it was formerly a ground surface, and if we relate to that to the levels of the caves, we can see it was actually formerly quite a level plateau almost coming out from this grassed area into the caves.
They did well to spot that, didn't they, at the bottom of that hole?
That's a very good piece of excavation indeed. It would have been very easy to travel through that.
And this means that this whole part of the coastline would have once looked very different. 600 years ago, the entrance to the well cave would have been a much more welcoming prospect, and as well as providing refuge to hermits, it may also have once been home to the people who farmed the plateau throughout the Middle Ages. It would also suggest that the sloping cave where Phil's been working probably wouldn't have required a degree in potholing to enter it.
Deliberate floor. What we were looking at, that brown stuff with all the black charcoal in it, was actually trample lying on the top of this floor. And you can see that quite clearly in the section here. I mean, it's probably about that thick. And the stone floor itself, well, you can see it's a bit higgledy-piggledy, but it starts here, which is part of the natural boulders. Right. And that's part of it there, that natural boulder there. But the interesting thing is when you get to here, you actually get stones that are laid in there deliberately. You can see it is a nice level surface.
They've sort of levelled it up to go with the bedrock then. Do we think it's Pictish?
I'd love to say it was. I really would. I mean, it is still at a good height for our carving. But realistically, I can't actually tell you. I think the truth is we're going to have to fall back on science and get a radiocarbon date.
Right.
And Phil now has his proof. Subsequent radiocarbon analysis of barley grains lifted from the occupation layer dated it to between 240 and 400 AD, which covers the late Scottish Iron Age and the beginning of the Pictish period.
So really we've got to leave what's underneath for somebody else, haven't we? That's too good to disturb, really.
We're beginning to get an idea of, just by looking in the cracks of what's underneath, and it looks like it is good, clean deposit. So, I mean, there may be other occupation levels underneath, but this is as far as we're going.
That's nice. I like that.
The discovery of this floor is a first for these caves. Proof that people lived here during the era of the Picts, the most mysterious people in British history. A people who left no written records of their nation, just enigmatic and stunning artistry.
There we are.
Is that it finished?
Yes, it's finished.
It is absolutely beautiful. Well done. Are you pleased?
Yes, thank you. It's come out very well. I'm very pleased about that.
The thing that really comes across to me is the contrast between the really high professional craftsmanship that's gone into making this is so different to the sort of graffiti level of the same designs carved on the caves here.
But even these crude carvings are personal declarations of the Pictish identity. And our new evidence shows they not only visited these caves, but some actually lived here. It's now only a matter of time before the Weems caves disappear, but at least we've helped to protect their legacy. Cutting-edge technology has digitally preserved the carved interiors, while the archaeology we've uncovered has told the story of a coastline that's had a brief but very eventful history.
Join a thriving worldwide community of Time Team fans on Patreon.
Our new target is to reach 15,000 worldwide supporters on Patreon by the end of 2025. This will enable us to continue expanding the Time Team world with more digs and greater access than ever before.
In early 2006, a light aircraft flew across the north coast of Anglesey on an aerial survey of the island. Then the photographer spotted something strange and took this photo. It revealed a massive earthwork about the length of 2 football pitches and on an island that was once home to one of history's most mysterious groups, accused of magical rituals, human sacrifice, even cannibalism, the Druids. So what exactly is this strange earthwork? As usual, we've got just 3 days to find out. Dating this massive earthwork's going to be critical. If it's Roman, then it's the product of one of the bloodiest episodes in Welsh history. In AD 61, the full force of the Roman army descended on this small island. Their mission? To destroy the stronghold of the British resistance, an insurgency led by the Druids. In a merciless attack unprecedented on British soil, they massacred the Druids and their followers and burnt down their sacred oak groves. But if our earthwork was built before the Roman invasion, then it could be a remnant of the very people the Romans set out to destroy, a relic of a lost world dominated by the Druids. So we put in 3 trenches over the large rectangular feature. Phil opens a trench over what looks like the entrance. Matt looks inside the rectangle in the hope of finding evidence of settlement. And Bridge opens a trench across what Mick thinks might be a stone rampart.
We'll have 2 bucket widths from there, that side of that line. Go, let's do it.
The relentless elements have made the ground bone dry. Digging's going to be tough.
You've got the natural where it comes over the rise,
yeah,
and then you've got the natural there, just in between there. That's not some sort of ditch.
Where? Well, look at that. He spotted that. He felt it in the finger.
You should swap jobs, I think.
Hey!
Phil, with more than a little help from Ian, has uncovered what appears to be the entrance to the enclosure. The ditch across the front would have made it impossible to approach the entrance directly. It looks defensive, but is it Roman or Iron Age? An imperial fort or the last refuge of the Druids? I know we've got evidence of Iron Age Celts in this part of the country, but do we actually have tangible evidence of Druids?
If you go over to another corner of the island, to RAF Valley Anglesey, back in the 1940s, workmen, not archaeologists, discovered in the peat, where there had once been a lake, close on 150 objects of iron and bronze. And we have some replica examples here and some images. This image of a bronze decorative plaque. Think of this as the Mercedes-Benz sign on the front of your fancy car, but put this on the front of your wagon or chariot. And the question is, who was directing the dumping, now let's use a better word, deposition, gifting of these objects, including swords? They'd been bent and broken before they were thrown into the lake. Who was doing that?
So this is what Francis would call ritual deposition, just like you have on your own site at Flag Fen over in Cambridgeshire.
Yes, absolutely. This is one of the classic ritual sites. Throughout Britain and Europe, you have deposition of offerings into bogs and wet places. It is a religious activity, and it's only towards the end of that period, in the last 3 or so centuries, that it actually gets attributed to the Druids. They were the blokes doing the stuff.
From his hilltop home, the Iron Age chieftain who ruled this corner of Anglesey could see the source of his power, economic and spiritual, laid out before him. And he made sure that anyone looking back could see it too.
If you remember, the geophys showed another ditch on the outside of the main big ditch. So we put this trench in, and what we discovered wasn't what we thought. It wasn't another ditch. Right. But we came across these big rocks. We found about 5 of these. And they went in a line across the trench here. So I put an extension in.
Yeah.
And I think that's the foot of a wall.
So you got a wall through here?
We got a wall. This, in other words, the bank that accompanied the big ditch had a revetment, stone revetment.
To stop all this stuff tipping over?
Yes, but I mean, we've just got the bottom of it. It may well have been higher.
Yeah.
In which case, you could have seen a stone wall down there in the valley, and it would have looked, you know, really spectacular. And it sort of enhances this impression that this is a very high status, important site.
It would have looked like a fort on the horizon, wouldn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
In an imposing structure like this, we'd expect to find substantial houses. But so far, the only sign of Iron Age occupation is a series of small post holes. They don't look much, but Mick and Francis are impressed.
It's probably the best evidence we're going to get for settlement on this site, for actual buildings and structures, isn't it?
Yes, but dating them with any precision is impossible, other than by absence of pottery. But they're right in the centre of our enclosure, which is where we know they ought to be. So they're at the centre of power, if you like. And if we could join them all up into coherent pattern, I think we'd find there would be round houses, about sort of 8 metres diameter, thatched roof, that sort of thing.
But the posts can't have been very big. They're pretty small.
No, but I think the problem is, you see, we're seeing just the bottom bit of the post hole. All the rest of it, the actual footer or mooring which the post has been eroded by ploughing across this site. We're right at the bottom of them.
So you're happy that there were actually Iron Age people building shelters here, not just putting up fences?
Yes. I think it's more than shelters.
Yes, it's houses.
This would be a substantial house, you know, where people have reconstructed. They're quite substantial buildings.
And at nearby Mellon Clernon, a team of experimental archaeologists and modern builders are demonstrating just how substantial. Their reconstructions show these were simple but brilliant designs. Carefully placed posts bore the weight of the roof and defined the large communal space. And a thatched roof would have kept out the very worst Welsh weather. It was the perfect house for this hill, a substantial, weatherproof home fit for even the most powerful chieftain. So is the mysterious pit next door another part of this domestic picture?
Going down? That's going down?
Yeah.
Even Francis wouldn't get this excited about a rubbish pit.
Oh, this is looking good!
Yeah. Hang on, I see another of these yellowy stones just under there.
There. Right, so what it looks like then, Francis, is a kiss. So it'll be a little grave, possibly, lined with stone, and probably, what, Bronze Age, early Bronze
Could be.
Age?
Well, it certainly is of appropriate size and shape for a crouched inhumation.
If you know so much about it, do you really want me to bother and dig it?
This is completely unexpected. Looking for signs of Iron Age settlement, it seems we found a Bronze Age grave, not 2, but 4,000 years old. The oval grave was lined with large flat stones. The body would have been curled up inside. It seems the acidic soil has destroyed the bones, but the discovery helps us rewrite the history of this hill. We're saying those post holes are about 2,000 years old, and that burial is about 4,000 years old. In other words, the people who were looking at that burial were as far away from it in time as we are from the Romans.
But think now, if there were a heap of stone over this burial pit, it was there, it was being respected by the builders of these new houses.
It's odd, isn't it? Because for us, special places like churches and synagogues and what have you tend to be very much separate from our everyday lives, and yet that seems to be right in the middle of Iron Age everyday life.
But then, as we all know, the landscape has changed and the way we read the landscape has changed. And I think we've lost so much meaning in terms of, you know, the specialness of the hill, the ancestors who have worked this land for millennia. And that's the mindset, I believe, that these people had. And of course we were advised by those special people, those Druids, who were helping us to make sense of history.
3 days ago, this earthwork was almost unheard of. One of the few clues to its existence was a photograph. Now we've uncovered 4,000 years of history on this Welsh hillside. It begins with one person, buried but not forgotten. Because 2,000 years later, this hill was still a special place, the power base for an important chieftain. It gave him a link to the past, shelter, food, even a sacred lake. He had it all. And then the Romans arrived. Life on Anglesey and on this hill changed forever. The curiously empty ditches suggest wind and rain began to fill them with earth soon after the invasion. The roundhouse post holes were covered by a blanket of soil, and a Roman coin dropped on top. It seems the chief and his people vanished, and the once mighty earthwork was abandoned. The roundhouses fell into disrepair or were even demolished, and the terrifying events of the Roman invasion were hidden beneath gentle pasture. This exposed hill bears witness to the island's darkest hour. Dave, it's really come on, hasn't it?
Yes, it has. Growing nicely. We're almost on the last stage.
Despite dry willow and strong winds, Dave and his team have proved it would have been possible for the Iron Age Celts to build a wicker man. Let me show you the head. Does that remind you of anybody? As Dave puts the finishing touches to our wicker man, it's easy to forget that 2,000 years ago, this would have been a gruesome spectacle. But stuffed with straw instead of humans, it's far from terrifying. In fact, it feels strangely familiar.
Drink to you, mate.
Phil certainly seems to be feeling a connection. It's tempting to find faint echoes of this ancient custom in our modern traditions, from corn dollies and the Green Man to Guy Fawkes. How much of the ancient British way of life did the Romans really destroy? How much do we owe to that elusive elite, the Druids? Join Time Team on Patreon to access exclusive 3D models, masterclasses, and behind-the-scenes insights.